Jen, is that I will, it is, you should lead with your experience, not with advice. And I counsel this to founders. I counsel this to my founder Nexus group that I run now. If you give advice, you will often be wrong because your context and their context are never going to be the same. However, if you lead by sharing personal experience, you can never be wrong because you're just sharing your experience, and it's up to the listener to extract some actionable insight from that guidance or that experience rather than telling them what to do or how to do something. So overall, that's been a big ethos in my life, is just trying to accumulate experience and share experience.
Welcome back to It's Good to Catch Up. I'm your host, Jen Lorenzini. And today I have such a special guest for you all, a titan in the world of technology and entrepreneurship, and somebody that I was giddy to interview, Court Lorenzini. Court is a name synonymous with innovation, having founded multiple groundbreaking companies, most notably as the co-founder and first CEO of DocuSign, which revolutionized how we're all doing business. But his story extends far beyond that, encompassing a remarkable career as a serial entrepreneur, an active investor, and a passionate advocate for fostering the next generation of founders. From his early days as an engineer to building, scaling, and advising companies that reshape industries. Court brings a wealth of experience, a unique perspective on leadership, and some refreshingly contrarian views on startup strategy. We'll explore the genesis of DocuSign, the lessons and gratitude he observed from his father, and learn about his latest venture, Founder Nexus, which aims to empower entrepreneurs. What I was also hoping for you all to understand is that he is genuinely kind and looks for ways to be of service in business, in philanthropy, and with family. I have been around a great number of Silicon Valley founders, and for me, Court's at the top of my list. What was extra special for me was learning and getting to share with you all a little bit about his amazing father, Bob Lorenzini, who is seen as one of the founding fathers of Silicon Valley. So grab your cup, sit back and get cozy, and listen in on an insightful and engaging conversation with Court Lorenzini. It's good to catch up. Our guest today is a true titan and visionary in the world of technology. And as the son of one of the founding fathers of Silicon Valley, he understood the world was limitless. As a co-founder of DocuSign, he fundamentally changed how the world agrees, turning a company name into a verb, all the while being present to his cherished family. Now he's dedicated to helping the next wave of innovators as the founder of Founder Nexus. It's so good to catch up with Court Lorenzini. Court, welcome to the show.
Hey, Jen, thanks for having me, and so fun to be able to do this with you.
Thank you. Thank you. There is an icebreaker that I wanted to ask you, but just to kind of like take you back, you are from the San Francisco Bay Area, which is our connection, which is a fun connection. You also grew up during an amazing time here in the Bay Area. Knowing where you started and where you're at now, beyond the big headlines, what's one thing that you're excited about personally or professionally that might surprise people?
Ooh, okay. I'd say there's a couple things. I'm both excited about the prospects of future implications of AI, but also recognize that there needs to be an exemplar of what society could and should look like working in conjunction with AI. Because there's a dystopian future that a lot of people concern themselves with, and I think it's worth thinking about. But my excitement is creating an example of a future that works with AI as a way to continue to amplify society and make it better, not make it worse. So I'm excited about that.
You are also the son of a great pioneer, Bob Lorenzini. What was it like growing up in your household of having that as a father figure for you?
Fair enough. And I should probably back up because I'm not sure many people will have ever heard of Bob Lorenzini. So that's a name that
That's
may not
true.
be
That's true. Yeah.
familiar for most. Yeah, my dad was one of the founding fathers of Silicon Valley. He actually is the person that invented the original machinery to turn silicon into crystals, which ultimately became the substrate for all integrated circuits. So his first company, Siltech, which mid 60s, was the creator of all of the silicon in Silicon Valley. And therefore we had an incredible front row view as a family to all of the great founders and companies and subsequent developments that have come out of Silicon Valley. He also had the great opportunity to be on the discovery team for solar energy, photovoltaics, which was the idea of how do we turn the sun into usable power. And that accrued to his benefit later in his life because he started yet another company later, which was the foundational company around one of the foundational companies around solar power called Sun Power. And yeah, I mean, that was an incredible experience. I had so many opportunities to meet and understand the other founding fathers of Silicon Valley and interact with them as just friends around the dinner table. These were not people. And I think the biggest takeaway for me, and I realize now as an adult, later in my career, how valuable this was, not to be intimidated by famous or successful people, that they themselves are just people and they have lives and spouses and kids and stuff that's going on in their world that's not related to their success or their notoriety as a business person. And so as I grew into my own desire to be a founder, it was easy for me to approach other successful people who were older than I was, because to me, that was just who I knew. And it wasn't that I was bringing those specific people into my universe. It was just that I had the confidence because I wasn't intimidated by them.
I love it. So you grew up kind of close to Stanford University as well. Were conversations around the dinner table about your dad's technology? Were you able to ask any questions around it?
I
Or
wouldn't say
what
the dinner table.
process? Okay.
And it wasn't, we weren't talking about my father's business or businesses around the dinner table per se. Uh, but very early, I was allowed to, and even encouraged to, meet the people in his office, interface with them, develop relationships. One of my very first jobs, when I was 14, 15 years old, was to be a janitor in his company. Okay. You're like, wow, the CEO founder's son is the janitor. Yeah. Well, it taught me a lot and it was amazing. And it gave me a leg to, a rung of the ladder to start on. And it allowed me to meet more people in the company. And then the next year I got another job and the next year I got a better job and it just kept leveraging. My father was very big on, anti-nepotism. He didn't, and he always said like, don't expect me to ever give you any money. Like you got to earn it. You earn your own keep. And so, yeah, I started as a janitor, scrubbing toilets and painting walls for his company. And I appreciated that. It was not a negative thing. It was actually a good job and I'm glad I had it and just kept working. But yeah, it wasn't a dinner table thing as much as it was access to all these other interesting people that he was constantly interfacing with as friends. We would take vacations together. They would come over for dinner and just getting to know them as people. Again, not thinking, as a young person, you're not that interested in what the adults do for a living, quite honestly. But you get a sense that these people are very successful. And so it's fun to get to know them in that context.
I would love a time machine to go back and ask them, like, what would you think is like the biggest idea to come out of this? And see how all of these things either exceeded or met their expectations. Because I never want to assume that we've exceeded their expectations because it was their idea, right? We're not part of their dreams. We didn't have LinkedIn back then. We didn't have browsers back then. Did people know who your father was when you had actually gone off to college and gotten into the business world?
No,
Because it
that,
wasn't
that,
good.
that those it was a very tight circle of people who understood his impact on Silicon Valley. In certain circles, he was well recognized, but broadly, even to this day, that's not a name people would look at and go, "Oh, I know exactly who that is."
I have to tell you, there is a new development over in San Ramon, and Lorenzini is one of the names on the streets, and I'm wondering now I'm gonna go back and go look at the different names to see if it was maybe because there's I'm like, "Why? Why would that name?" There's only 100 of us in the Bay Area, but one special one. Was the decision to go away to college? You went to Duke, not Duke.
Duke,
You did go
yes.
to Duke. You did go to Duke. You decided to go to Duke versus going to Stanford. Was that a personal decision to kind of make your own way?
I wouldn't say it was to make my own way. I think I always understood both my parents were Stanford grads and we lived in the area. And that was sort of not a large percentage of my high school class ended up at Stanford or staying in the Bay Area. My love of Duke started when I visited the campus. I had all these acceptances to various universities around the world, around this country. And I knew I wanted to be an engineer. And I got on Duke's campus and literally fell in love. And it was one of those moments where I knew in that instant that this was the place for me. I literally finished the tour, having been walked around by a student. And I looked at my mom, who happened to be traveling with me at the time. And I'm like, this is it. And literally, we walked from the tour to the admissions office and wrote them a check for admissions on the spot. So I'm like, I don't need to see anymore. I don't need to go anyplace else. And I never regretted that decision. That was one of the best decisions I ever made.
For many reasons. I would think in addition to your education, you also met the love of your life there. So
Yes. Yes, that
that
was a bonus, but we didn't meet until 2 years after we both graduated. So we didn't know
yeah.
each other as undergrads. She was working on her PhD at Duke, and I met her while I was traveling back to visit another friend.
So you really left the Bay Area at 18 then.
Correct. I
Yeah.
left until until I came back. I did come back for a few years post graduation. Worked at Cisco Systems when Cisco was a startup, relatively speaking, and
Huge now. I don't know
was
if you've heard.
fortunate enough to be there at the time when it went from, and startup is relative because they were already doing a couple hundred million in sales, which isn't very startup-y, but we went from 200 million to 4.5 billion in sales in less than 4 years, which at the time was the fastest growing company in history. And I was privileged to work for an extraordinary leadership team there and really learn how to do leadership growth development well. And that has always left a huge mark for me. And I talk about this with young people that are interested in, should I go out of college and go straight into a startup? And my guidance is usually no. Go work for a big company where you can spread your wings and make all the mistakes and be trained and learn what great looks like, not just what you think good looks like. And then you can start to emulate that when you're a founder. But if you don't do that, you just don't know. And you're going to make a ton of mistakes.
Were you working there when you had the idea for DocuSign?
No, that was the very first startup I did when I left Cisco was at the dawn of the internet, 1995, 96. My co-founder, who was at Microsoft in Seattle or in Redmond, and myself at Cisco in the Bay Area, had come up with an interesting idea about comparison shopping because back in the mid 90s, there was no such thing as commerce on the internet. It was just data. And so we invented the original comparison shopping matrix that most people see now as, products across the top, features down the left, and how do they all compare? I ended up building a business around that, selling it. It was a reasonable success, not a home run, but we sold the business in 2001. DocuSign came a few years later. I started DocuSign in 2003. And that evolved in a different way.
Yeah, it sure did. I think one of my questions is in the early 2000s, you were challenging centuries of behavior around papers, pens, and fax machines. What was the single business non technical hurdle you had to overcome to get those first crucial customers to trust a digital signature?
So to answer that question, Jen, I have to frame it, meaning as you say, we were competing against the fax machine and a FedEx envelope. Those were our two primary our competitors, and the established behavior was well understood. So we had to radically shift how people behaved. And the fundamental the fundamental lever that we could pull on was that in 1998, 99, the federal government had passed a law called the eSign Act. And the eSign Act said that you could nationally recognize an electronic signature as a binding legal element. So that was the foundational piece that had to be in place for us to start the company. However, nobody had ever adjudicated a case that was legally signed by an electronic signature. So my biggest hurdle in the earliest days was getting the chief legal officer of any company of substance to agree to use it, because from their perspective, they knew they were playing it safe. All the lawyers were like, hey, you're asking us basically to bet our business on this technology, because if our sales contracts get challenged in court and they don't hold up, we don't really have a leg to stand on. So yeah, sorry, we'll pass for now. And we got that again and again and again. And so in a pure moment of entrepreneurial necessity, I did something that most people probably might not have considered. I went out and I hired a judge, a jury, and a prosecuting and defense attorney. And I found a case of a document, an insurance document that was being tried for whether or not it was an actual signature. And I adapted the case to an electronic signature. And then I paid for them to run the entire trial to completion, in the hopes that what we would achieve was a ruling in favor. And that would be the basis that I could then send to a chief legal officer and say, see, it will hold up if it goes to court. What I actually did or accomplished was so far better than that I couldn't even have imagined, because not only did the judge rule in favor of the electronic signature, he went on to write an opinion paper after the fact. And the opinion paper said, I have tried as a juror, as a judge, dozens of these kinds of cases, and never before have I seen so much overwhelming evidence to support the concept of a signature. And it was so much better than a handwriting analyst coming in to decide whether this was the person's legal signature in ink or not, whether you could decide whether the fax was legitimate or not, or somebody had applied a signature after the fact. He said, this was a slam dunk. Okay, so now having that judgment in hand, I could go to the chief legal officers of any company and say, look, this actually will hold up. You're safe coming in the water. And that was one of our several huge unlocks at that time.
By the way, as a person who was working in compliance and ethics at that time, it was revolutionary. I have to confess, though, I had a client last year, who was struggling to understand that they wanted to use their DocuSign instance versus like the one that came through. I think that people still have boogie monsters, like with regards to like how things get like recorded and saved and, and whatnot. And also how data travels, and what's legitimate in this country versus, different organizations across the seas. You actually talked on really thinking about, you have an incredible gratitude for the leaders you got to learn from. If you're looking back then to now, what do you think about leadership that has changed for good, that is no longer kind of serving? You talk about having the confidence to come into a room and talk to people. Do you think that leaders are making themselves available for those kind of conversations now more than they did then?
I fear that we have regressed
Mm,
somewhat.
yeah.
I witness in my own experience now with the organization I run today, which interfaces with venture scale founders around the world, that this new generation often does not have the same person-to-person skills that maybe someone from my generation grew up with. And that's not to be a net negative, but it's just an observation. I think that has to do with the fact that this new generation came up with computers and phones, mostly phones, where text and textual communications and things were the norm and ways to communicate with people, as opposed to picking up a phone or having an in-person meeting. And I always encourage the founders I work with to keep working on that muscle, to keep developing that ability to have person-to-person live dialogues that are not intercepted by your email or your text string, where you can pause and think about what you're going to say, but you have to actually relate to the person in real time. Yeah, I think it has changed. And I think, but also there's some benefits to what this next generation is bringing to the table. That just happens to be one I've noticed that maybe we're getting a little light on.
Yeah, I'm struggling with giving advice. So I have a 29-year-old, and every time I go to give him advice, he's like, "No, no, 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 that's only going to work for you. That doesn't work for me." And so I am also like, "No, you should get in front of I didn't have access to the different conversations you had, but I am one lucky gal who's worked for some amazing founders as part of Silicon Valley. So I too have the audacity to think I belong at a table. And I think that that is the challenge that we're having with some of the younger generation is they too believe they should be at the table. It's just how to get invited into the room. And where I also struggle are some of the folks my age who think that they should be quiet and listen in, versus I love it. I am not embarrassed to say that my best team that I had back at Google were all my son's age. Actually, a few of them went to university with them. And I relate to them a lot better now than I think I did when I was younger and trying to figure them out.
What I often say, Jen, is that it is, you should lead with your experience, not with advice. And I counsel this to founders. I counsel this to my founder Nexus group that I run now. If you give advice, you will often be wrong because your context and their context are never going to be the same. However, if you lead by sharing personal experience, you can never be wrong because you're just sharing your experience and it's up to the listener to extract some actionable insight from that guidance or that experience rather than telling them what to do or how to do something. So overall, that's been a big ethos in my life is just trying to accumulate experience and share experience.
Yeah, I think my catchphrase would be like, "My spidey sense says this may not go this way. What is the plan B if it happens?" So so after so you get into DocuSign, you become their first CEO, and then you start to pivot. Did you ever think about just packing it in and going and living a life of, like, leisure? I mean, you have accomplished so much, and then you keep coming back in and really making sure that you are of service to those around you.
I've never actually thought about stopping, and there's a reason why. Number one, I'm very much fulfilled by working with founders, and I also learned very early in my career, and this manifests at DocuSign just like every other place I've been, a couple of interesting lessons. Lesson number one, as a founder, i.e. the first person or persons around the table, you will accumulate about 70% of your terminal value in a startup by year number 5. Meaning you could spend another 2 to 20 years in the same company and only accrue another maybe 30% of value accretively to yourself. So that is one data point. The other data point I understand is that in deep self-reflection, I understand that my best and happiest contribution opportunity exists in the 0 to 1 phase when the company is trying to figure out the product, the customer, the pricing, all of it. Every decision is existential. It's like walking a tight wire all the time. You have to be good at listening and pivoting and understanding. That's where I have both the most energy and the most expertise. And that I learned that when it gets to what I call phase 2, which is the rapid growth phase, where the problems change from what are we doing to how do we grow faster, that my interest wanes and that there are people who are very, very good at that phase of growth and development that if I'm again back to my 70% is already accreted to me, I'm better off handing the reins to someone who's going to really knock the cover off the ball in phase 2. And maybe they even hand off to somebody that gets into phase 3, which is profitability. And so I get to about year 5 in each of the companies I start historically, and then I exit because my love and passion and my long-term financial success, it serves both of those. So I got to, I started DocuSign in '03. I left in '08. And then I went and started two more venture-backed or near venture-backed companies after that. One which was a reasonable success and one which was an absolute catastrophic failure. And, you learn something every time.
The failure, that was the not to use that F word, but that was with regards to correct?
No. So, my fourth company was a company called MetaBright.
Okay.
And without going into all the details, it was a fascinating ride where I was doing everything. We were doing everything right. We were actually on a multi-million-dollar ARR run rate, growing at 50% a month. And within 3 months, it was dead, completely 100% dead. And it was a series of extraordinarily unlikely events that all happened to happen in sequence that caused that absolute failure. There was nothing I or any founder or anybody else could have done about that under the circumstance. But it led me to understand the perilous journey that founders are on holistically, because you can be doing everything exactly right and still fail. And that's a humbling experience, I will tell you. And it was one that certainly left a mark on me, but it left a mark in a way that I think ultimately is positive, because you need to then understand all the potential black swan failure events that come out of things. So they're not all winners, let's say. I think in fact, statistically, most of them are losers.
Yeah. Do you have like a core group of friends that you like to do your startups with, or have you always pivoted depending on the endeavor?
The latter. There are some people who build sort of a posse or a group around them that they constantly go to work with. I built a new group at every turn, and I think I've come to understand why. My expertise individually in the world is understanding how to optimize startups and the startup journey. And because that is my perspective, the topic, the industry, the subject matter, was less material than creating a great business. And I often talk about I'm trying to create great businesses, not great products. Because a great business means it has profit. It understands the long-term goals and objectives. Great products can fail easily if they're not surrounded by a great business. So since my focus has always been on creating great entrepreneurial businesses, I find the right people to come on that particular journey with me in order to achieve success for that concept. And so it typically does not include people from the prior journey. That doesn't mean there wasn't overlap at times,
Mhm.
but it wasn't a core group that I just kept dragging along.
So you started Founder Nexus about a year ago, correct?
Correct.
This is a unique endeavor because this is making you a much more public figure.
Indeed.
I've listened to your podcast. I've listened to your interviews. You're doing amazing with it, with these new audiences and new questions. Is there a theme that you're seeing with the enthusiasm coming in with these founders that make you feel really good?
Well, the founding principle for Founder Nexus is to help venture scale founders succeed at a higher rate. So I have a thesis. My thesis is the current statistical average success rate for a venture scale founder is 3%. I believe I can get it to 9 to 10%. So I think I can at least triple their odds of success. And I'm willing to put my time, money, and influence behind that thesis. That's what Founder Nexus is. It's basically saying, if we can connect the world's venture scale entrepreneurs and let them share their lived experiences, again, back to no advice, only experience, that each of those opportunities creates an opportunity to make a better executional decision, and that accrues to better outcomes. So I call that the success equation, where every action decision that a founder makes along their journey to build their business is all multiplied together. And if you see the world that way, two things jump out. Number one, if you get any one of those, success equation means that if you get any one of those variables wrong, dead wrong, then the whole equation fails. And if you get any small series of them below 50% of their potential achievable value, the equation is failing over time. No wonder it only succeeds at 3%. You have to basically get every single decision and thing you do across the entire life of the company greater than 0.5 on a relative implementation scale. The odds of doing that are heavily weighed against. So the Founder Nexus principle is by getting founders to exchange experience, that your natural ability to make a call on a particular decision might go from a 0.3 to a 0.6. And if you keep doing that over time, that equation is succeeding.
I love that
And
experiment.
so the through line here, Jen, is that this is not going to be manifest for quite some time. We won't know if this promise we're making is in fact coming true. But the fact that we're getting, hundreds and hundreds of founders from all over the world to participate and engage, and even the skeptics coming in and, oh, I've seen groups like this. It's like, oh no, this is really different. I've never seen anything like this. I've never been a part of anything like this. And yeah, I want to join this group. I want to be part of this because I definitely understand that it's going to help me raise my odds of success.
It just makes me think, what a beautiful community that you're building as well. And a nice example for future innovators to also make sure that they come back and not make sure. I have to make sure I'm not putting on expectations of other people that shouldn't be on them. But, around what it is to be of service and really lean in and get that. Because in addition to this, you're giving your time, you're also giving a lot of it for free. You're online, you're talking about this, you're bringing them in. I want to be honest though, like right now it's a little scary out there. We don't know where things are kind of coming and going and I mean, good grief. If I look at the technology that I was even selling 12 months ago and how it's been so dramatically changed, and now part of it's like just regular ROI. How do you keep their enthusiasm kind of and their attention coming back to you?
Meaning the founders?
Yeah, yeah.
Founders are easy. Founders are like puppies. They all have boundless energy. And I often say when you put a bunch of founders together, it's like a puppy pile, meaning there's just this incredible just this energy of just, oh, we're all going to jump on each other. This is so exciting. And I'm so excited. And the point that I'm trying to get to is to take all that energy and enthusiasm and continue to give them ways to succeed, not just express their energy. Because one of the things that I see often with founders is statistically 97% of them are going to fail, which is very challenging, let's just say, as a founder. When something you've delivered into the universe fails, it's very hard to step back and kind of take stock of that. But most of them come back for multiple turns at the crank. And so that enthusiasm is inherently there, which is what makes them founders in general, right? Their willingness to take those big risks. So yeah, I think really it's more being a place where we can not only harness the energy, but also put it to best possible use and to maximize their impact on the world. Because again, beyond my thesis of success rate, I have even a broader context, which I'm hoping I can change the world's economy. I know that sounds incredibly
No?
out there, but I look at venture success as also being something that's too focused on a small number of geographies who reap the disproportionate rewards economically in those communities. And I believe that if we can put the right resources out into the world, that you can create the foundation for venture success everywhere. And by virtue of doing that, you get to sort of rebalance the world's economy a bit and create opportunities not just for 20 mega cities and places with venture-backed outcomes, but anywhere and everywhere in the world. And then you start to see these large economic successes accrue benefits across many geographies, many different peoples, many different economies. And ultimately, more things become successful, in which case the odds that improves the world and societal outcomes also goes up. So for me, it's this sort of stepwise equation, and I'm trying to do my own part of that.
That actually reminds me, my very first guest was Dr. Steve Miller, who I don't know if you guys know each other in the different spaces. He is one of the founders that started Carnegie Mellon's Their Learning, and then he moved out here. We met through T-ball or baseball, but he was talking about the same kind of thing. And he was saying that the impact of the right teacher in the right environment has a degree of influence of $10 million on an economy, and a negative degree if those teachers aren't, teacher is a relative term. We had to clarify it. It was not only the teacher, it was the home life. It was, do you have time for schooling? Do you have food in your belly? All of those other things. And I think you're doing the exact same thing, but just in an adult sphere of, hey, let's make sure everything is good and tight for you as you kind of go into this. That's wonderful, and that's a beautiful way to be of service. One of the questions I ask people is, take my advice, I'm not using it. But you have just basically Founder Nexus is that. Like you're not giving advice, you're telling people these lived experiences. Although I would be curious, what is some advice you wish to give that you would have given yourself earlier around kind of mental health and making sure that you're taking care of your physical health?
So I get asked this question a lot. How
Oh,
do you
okay.
create balance? How do you create, something that is healthy for you as a human as well as your entire sphere? And I start with the position that I believe the concept of balance is false. There is no such thing. I believe that's something that we're all being sold that we should try to aspire to. I do not believe it is appropriate or even attainable. What I counter with is allocation, which is to say, you have a choice based on all the constituencies that you are connected with, your natal family, your married family or home family, your friends, yourself, your company, your mental health, your physical health. All of these things are vying for some level of your attention. And it is up to you not to create balance, but to properly consider them and allocate time to each of them as appropriate throughout your life. And I broke it down into, don't try and hold myself accountable to doing that in the same proportion every day, but sometimes it would be looking at those allocations by week or by month or by year, and also creating structure that would allow me to attend to most of those on a daily basis, but not all of them. And knowing that there were some moments that certain of those allocations needed to be higher for certain of those constituencies at any given time, and then adjusting accordingly, and then reallocating later when the need was less. And this could go to attention that your family requires of you, to your business, to your friends, to your siblings, to this is. And I always had to prioritize the basics. Okay, I got to get enough sleep, because when I don't get enough sleep, I'm a mess. I needed to make sure that I prioritized good food, regular eating, and exercise. Those were some of the things that I knew that for my mental health, I had to keep up. But I also needed to, when my family was young, I needed to make sure I had time for my children and time for my spouse and time for myself to just decompress and not be part of running a big company or building a startup, which will take every single hour that you are willing to give it, and it will consume everything. So again, I had to learn, again, back to my younger self. My younger self didn't understand that. And in my first startup, I over-indexed to the company. So by the time I got to DocuSign, which was my second startup, I had learned many of those lessons and I was able to put that into practice. But even that was interesting because it helped me create successful culture in the company. Because if the CEO doesn't arrive until 9 in the morning and always leaves at 6. So in a startup environment, that's often seen as verboten. You don't want to do that. It's setting a bad example. What I was doing though was I was prioritizing making sure that my kids got up, got a good breakfast and got to school, and that I was there to be present, and then I was home in time for family dinner. And I could work later. I could do other things if I had more things that had to be done for work. And it gave my employees a concrete example that the most senior person in the company is creating some space for his family life. And ultimately that accrued to our benefit. One of my greatest accomplishments is that DocuSign not only has created happiness for almost everybody that has touched it. Every time I meet somebody that's ever used or interfaced with a product, I have a smile and a thank you. That's extraordinary to have put something out into the world that has created so much joy and appreciation. but that to this day, 5 or 6 CEOs later, DocuSign is still considered one of the best companies to work for in the world. That culture of nurtured support, longitudinal essence has maintained even through multiple leadership cycles. And that means that I did a good job creating the foundation. And I'm very proud of that.
Well, congratulations. Kind of just wanted to put a bow on Founder Nexus. Is there a minimum requirement for someone to reach out, or is like there a baseline of what they should be ready to commit to before they kind of reach out and want to sign up?
Yes. So our minimum accepted application, so people do have to apply unless they're referred from a known source, that you have to have at least 3 years of experience as a founder. You have to have successfully raised some outside capital, maybe in a prior venture or other, and that you are currently or planning to build something venture scale, which means that your pitch deck has to be, say it's going to get to 100 million annual recurring revenue or more.
Okay.
And that's the minimum. And honestly, Jen, what I'm looking for there are battle scars, because early in your journey as a founder, you make a lot of mistakes and those accumulate as scar tissue, virtual scar tissue, obviously, and you don't know what you don't know. But after a few years and enough scar tissue, you appreciate how hard it is to build a venture scale business. And you have something not only to share in terms of your scar tissue and what you learned along the way in terms of experience and expertise, but you are open to learning from the scar tissue of others. And so the whole ethos of Founder Nexus is we're here to share that scar tissue in service of raising everybody's odds of success.
Does it tickle you to know it's making a difference and, like this is really impactful? I can see the traction you're getting online. I can see all of the posts that you're getting. This is an outward focus of love and kind of positive PR that you are getting through the different channels. Does it feel different doing it this way?
Well, I'm going to frame that differently. Somebody asked me recently, of all the companies you've started, which one was your favorite? And I immediately say Founder Nexus, the current one. And they're, oh, come on, that's recency bias. You're just saying that because it's the one you're working on right now. And in fact, that's not true, because what I'm doing now is the sum total or the accumulation of all of the experiences I have had, and understanding that my differentiated offering in the world is the ability to optimize venture scale startups. So I am fulfilled, and my cup is overflowing every day by working with founders to help them succeed. That in and of itself is energizing to me. So yes, it started out as and remains. I mean, I'm not looking to make a fortune on Founder Nexus. Founder Nexus is not a next giant company for me. Where it accumulates value for me is that I am an investor in dozens of private companies and almost 20 venture funds around the world. And if my thesis is correct and I can prove that Founder Nexus members succeed at triple the average, I'll reap a financial reward when they succeed. Like, I'll be an investor in their company or in their fund, and that'll give me the reward. It's not about Founder Nexus. That is my opportunity to be of service to the world and to create this outcome that I believe is better. I go back to what I'm concerned about with AI is there's no exemplars of a great collaborative community that incorporates AI. I believe Founder Nexus can be that exemplar. And that's part of what I want, tertiary benefit out of this. But I think there's going to need to be examples. Otherwise, it could go in a very poor direction.
I think we're all seeing the competition heating up, and then also the kind of different impacts on the environment that are happening. So I too would love to see much better collaboration between people so that we're not, kind of tearing everything down in order to build one up. So that's great. Court, you are amazing as always. This exceeded expectations. Thank you for all of this incredible knowledge. We will list Founder Nexus in the title here. If anybody wants to learn more, you have episodes and stuff online as well, correct?
Yeah, the easiest way to connect with me is via LinkedIn, very public profile. I'm pretty quick to respond to LinkedIn requests and respond to messages. So that's the easiest way to find me.
Well, you are amazing, and thank you. It was good to catch up.
Jen, it was lovely to have this conversation, and I'm so glad you invited me. Thank you.
Thank you.